Here we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our final webinar of the series. We are going to be joining together in our awesome brains to think about how to foster a welcoming environment in parent-led groups. And I've already gone through a couple of housekeeping materials. If everybody is all set, I will jump over to the next slide and just, begin a little segment on how we can introduce ourselves to each other, our work, and our intentions here today. So folks already know who I am. I am unfortunately unable to be on camera today because the data is not doing so hot where I am. But here is a picture of my face. I have glasses. I have medium-ish black hair with bangs. I am smiling in a picture wearing a blazer, and there is a blue backdrop. I will be attempting to, just describe briefly visually every slide as much as I possibly can. If you realize that I am not doing that for any particular slide, feel free to always call me out and I will do it. But as I mentioned before, my name is Anne. I am a senior trainer and family engagement manager here at FCSN. My email is on the slide, hyperlinked in blue. Folks will be receiving a copy of the slide later on as well if you want any of the material here on hand. But I also encourage folks to just, if you can, screenshot anything you want to know about just to, keep it with you if I'm going a little too fast for folks, or if you want to take notes. That's always something that I encourage. I use she, they pronouns, and I am joined here today, as I mentioned before, with Leslie and Sarah Forster, who are lovely, lovely human beings. I'm just going to pass the mic over to Leslie. Leslie, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then we can popcorn it over to Sarah.
So good afternoon. My name is Leslie. I'm a project director at the Federation. I've been here a little over 13 years, primarily working with parent-led groups like CPACs. I am a white woman with now gray hair. Today I'm wearing headphones and glasses, and I'm in the office, and you'll see over my head an umbrella because the fluorescent lighting is terrible here. And I'll pass it over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. I'm Sarah Forster, and I'm the Northeast Regional Coordinator for the Family Ties program at the Federation. I use she, her pronouns, and I am also a white woman, and I have brown hair, and I'm wearing glasses and headphones today. And I'm excited to be here and learn along with you, as this is a newer area for me at the Federation to learn about. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Leslie, for being here. I appreciate you sending y'all hugs. But I forgot to mention a little bit more about who I am and why this work is particularly important to me. I am a Taiwanese immigrant. I grew up bilingual, and I am currently on a visa. And I am working because this is a very personal topic to me. This is something that influences my family. It's something that influences my life. And I think it's just important to integrate as much as we can family engagement with speaking about how we visualize and understand who newcomers and immigrants are, as well as how that leads all the way back to how we work with folks, share power, and learn from parents. So that's a little bit more about me. And I am an open book at any point. If folks ever want to ask any questions about my personal experience, there are no secrets. I will tell you anything you want. But I'm here as a resource, as somebody with lived experience. So moving onwards, I would love for folks, if you can, to please, speak up and introduce yourself. Give us your name and your title. Tell us what school district and community you're from. And lastly, just, I've said this every single time we've been doing these webinars, but I would absolutely love to hear from you what your experience with newcomers are. It's not great just, for my own personal data tracking, but also great for everybody else that is here, that doesn't quite necessarily know which school districts have what types of contact with newcomers. Perhaps you have 12, perhaps you have over 100. But all of this information is valuable, not only for us to know about each other, but for us to learn from. So if folks would, like to speak up and share, I would love to hear from you. Absolutely love to hear from you. But if folks feel more comfortable just putting it in the chat, I'm all ears as well. I'm going to give folks a couple of minutes and hand the stage off to you.
You want some of us to speak, introduce ourselves?
Yes, please.
Okay, my name is Kathleen Turner. Everybody calls me Katie. I use she, her pronouns. I have been working with newcomers for 22 years. I have been a special ed director, student services director, executive director for 20 years. I am the regional McKinney-Vento liaison for the Massachusetts Department of Education for the Cape Cod and Islands districts.
Thank you, Kathleen.
You're welcome.
And I remember seeing your face and your name. I'm so happy to have you back.
You're
And
welcome.
I always love the comments and, just the additions that you make. It's always so lovely to hear about. And thank you for being here. Are there any other folks that like to share who they are, their experience in newcomers, where they're coming from? I see a comment. Hello, Jenny. So good to see you again. Sending hugs your way. If you're comfortable with it, could I read your chat out loud? Okay, see a thumbs up. Jenny says, hi, everyone. My name is Jenny. I am the family engagement facilitator from Saltonstall School in Salem. And Jenny is awesome. I love Jenny. Thank you for being here. And I'm excited to just chat more with you later. Would anybody else like to speak about where they're coming from today? Anything else they'd like for folks to know, or just generally how their experience in newcomers has been? Okay, I think I gave that like a solid 10 seconds. If folks would like to, if folks would like to at any point, keep on introducing themselves in the chat, please feel free to do so. Please, make these connections, say hi to each other. We love it when you do that. But I'm gonna move on over to our next slide, just generally for the sake of time. All right, so today we'll be talking, primarily about different types of parent-led groups, family leaders, as well as how that, how we can integrate our connections with family leaders with our newcomer relationships. We're going to be going over some tools about belonging, as well as a couple of supportive frameworks that folks can use in order to then, in the next bullet point, break out into different groups and create implementation plans. This is why we have Leslie and Sarah here today with us. We're going to be ideally breaking out into maybe around 2 to 3 groups at the later half of our webinar here today. And we're going to be just discussing together how to personalize implementation plans, what are our next steps for reaching out to parent-led groups. What do we need to know about parent-led groups and so forth? And finally, we're going to break with a community reflection together. That will be, generally how we're going to be spending our time. But of course, this is always flexible. If there are questions that come up, we're happy to also answer it and everybody can learn from it together. I don't know everything in the world, and I am always happy to hear from folks. And what I really love to say is that, as folks coming in to learn about these subjects together, I am so happy to be able to, facilitate these conversations, but ultimately as, the folks within your districts, you are the expert of your, of your own families, of your own communities, and of your schools. And, I would love to learn from you as well. This slide is just a series of bullet points that I briefly covered just now. The topic is labeled agenda. There is a picture of a group of folks just kind of doing the team building thing of holding hands and sharing on the top right side of the screen. If folks have no questions with our agenda or what we're doing here today, I'm going to be moving onwards to the next slide. But if something pops up, and because I speak pretty fast, if you want to hear a little bit more about one thing or the other, please again feel free to utilize the chat or raise your hand. So we begin with highlighting a couple of parent-led groups that are pretty prevalent throughout Massachusetts. folks that are here today are already, very familiar and well aware of a couple of the groups that we're highlighting. On the slide, you will see a chart that is labeled parent groups. There are four rows, and each row has another column to the right side of the screen that gives a brief descriptor of what that parent group is or means. Now there are a couple of descriptions and, just, general wordings on here on what we know about these types of parent groups, but that's not necessarily all inclusive of every single type of definition or every type of legal, obligation that these groups have. And us folks here are primarily working in family engagement. We know these terms pretty well by this point. But this is primarily here for the sake of the recording as well, to bring any folks that are watching this that might not be familiar with these things up to speed, as well as just to generally spark conversation about what types of parent groups are not on here perhaps, or what types of parent groups you have the most interactions with, if there are any at all, or if there are any groups that you are planning to maybe reach out to in the future. And so therefore this screen is here not only as to serve as a reminder for folks, just reflecting on the types of groups there are, but also to spark conversation. And we have here with us today a resident expert on PACS, Leslie. So she's going to be hopping in, and Sarah is as well going to be hopping in at any point to, just kind of add a couple of things to this slide, or just any comments that they feel are necessary to our discussion about parent-led groups. For the sake of accessibility, I will be reading out each of these definitions for folks, just so that, you can also hear me say it. And I think it's probably a little easier this way. But we begin with the first row on this chart, which are CPACs. So a CPAC is a Special Education Parent Advisory Council. Every public school district in Massachusetts is required to establish a CPAC. And Massachusetts state law assigns both an advisory and participatory function to CPACs. Membership is open to all district parents of children with disabilities, and that includes, IEPs and 504 plans, as well as other interested parties. We are pulling this definition from FCSN itself. In parallel to CPACs, we also have LPACs, which is a little newer. LPACs are, sorry, I had to clear my throat. Oh my gosh, it's going to be a long 2 hours, folks. But but LPACs are an English learning parent advisory council, and it is a school district or charter school operating a language acquisition program for ELs serving 100 or more ELs, or in which ELs comprise at least 5% of the district's or charter school student population, whichever is less, are required to establish an LPAC. This definition is from DESE. I'm going to stop here first and see if Leslie or Sarah have anything else to add about CPACs and LPACs to the conversation.
I always have something to add.
And I love it.
So I hope that everyone realizes that these are requirements under the law. We are lucky in our state to have regulations that require these public advisory bodies in our state. They do set their own operational procedures, and most of them establish some type of a leadership structure. I think the hardest thing for these two groups is that there's no in the statute, there's no resources that are assigned to them, so that they tend to operate, with some support from the district, but usually on a shoestring. So it's difficult for them to provide the resources to have interpretation or translation services. And I think that's the area that we really need to highlight, is if we want newcomer families to participate in some of these parent-led groups, we have to make it a little bit more accessible. And I know some of the parents themselves serve as like ad hoc translators in meetings, but it's not the best practice. So if we can just kind of start the conversation around making the meetings a little bit more friendly and accessible, starting with language. But there's a whole cultural piece, whatever, but language is the first thing. They're often locked out. LPACs is a little bit more friendly for families whose first language may not be English, because they'll meet other families, but it's still run often by somebody from the district. So that's just my one thought on LPACs and CPACs.
Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate it. And I'm gonna leave the floor open for folks to just kind of add if folks have or know of CPACs and LPACs in their districts. You are more than welcome to put your thoughts as well in the comments, but I'm just gonna open, the floor up to folks if they would like to add on as well.
I'm going to add on.
Uh-huh.
Down Cape Cod and the islands, the CPACs actually down here do provide, if they know that there's going to be a parent who does not have English as a second language, needs a translator, they're providing translators at the meetings.
Great.
That's
So I
awesome.
do know that. And with Barnstable Public Schools being the largest school district on the Cape, that happens. I will say it's difficult if it's a virtual meeting. I find that it's harder to do it that way. It extends the meeting length, and the parents, I don't think, feel as inclusive with that happening. I'd rather see it be in person, like we do for individual educational plan meetings, right? Where it feels more inclusive. I think that when it's virtual, it's a little bit difficult.
I just did a workshop for a community, and they did the simultaneous in Spanish. And in one sense, I think it was a little bit more welcoming in that everybody had to adjust and be flexible and learn together. So we made it happen. It worked. It does take a little longer.
Thank you for adding that. I'm also, if there are any pauses, I know you can't see me right now, but it's because I'm writing notes down. Yeah, it's just really nice to hear also, from different districts, what their packs are up to. I think it also helps us all paint a bigger picture of where we all collectively. So thank you so much for sharing.
One thought is, and I don't know what school districts are doing when a new family comes to the district. Do they have a packet of information that they share with the family about the school and parent-led groups? And that would be something that I would ask CPACs, now that I'm thinking about it, to make sure that their information is available in that welcoming packet in multiple languages, and at least a contact, because we find that the parent to parent connection in a school district is so valuable. And Sarah, you can speak to this, the strength of families sharing information with other families, and just to get people connected to local resources too.
And I think, Leslie, that's a really great point to make. And I think it's definitely something that I would love to explore with folks later on as well, when we're doing, when we're examining what an action plan should be looking like, and where we are and what steps we need to take next. I think, making sure that packs are included during the registration process is going to be so important to folks, initially being able to make those connections. From, the folks that I've been speaking to one-on-one so far, especially from the family engagement department, if there is one, or if they are their own person and their own team, it really seems like a lot of these connections that folks make, naturally are relationship based because of the languages, because of, the kindness that a lot of our staff members extend to our families. And that is absolutely amazing. And I always love to hear about it. But, what that means is if there is turnover, realistically, that relationship, that connection is lost. And what better way to make sure that that relationship is sustained than other parent groups? So, I'm hoping that we can have a bigger conversation about this, especially moving forward. I think there's so much potential here, and everybody is so amazing. We have so many great minds in this room. We're going to be able to figure something out, y'all. But I also see another message in the chat right now from Christina. Christina says that CPACs are a great resource for families who are advocating for their children to get special education services and children who have not yet been found eligible. Thank you so much. That is an excellent point. And I think, that's definitely something that we really have to connect our newcomer families with, especially if they, might not know the lay of the land yet, if they don't really know how to navigate the system, if there already is a community in place for parents that, are learning together about how to navigate special education, both in the schools, both in the systems and within their communities. That's something that is so valuable for folks to share. I'm going to move on really quickly over to the last two rows. We also have PTOs, which are parent-teacher organizations, as well as site councils. And this one has a little bit more of a bigger description from Desi. Just to keep in mind of auditory folks that prefer auditory learning, I am going to read aloud that definition as well. So a school council is a representative school building based committee composed of the principal, parents, teachers, community members, and at the secondary level, students required to be established by each school pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 71, Section 59C. This was a lot longer. I cut it down a little bit for the sake of everybody here. The last sentence is school councils enhance site-based decision-making because they expand the participation of the school community in its school's decision-making. This definition is from Desi. I am very happy to share, the pages that I'm grabbing all of these definitions from later as well. If folks are curious and want to just check it out by themselves. But, generally, I'd like to also spark a conversation about PTOs, site councils, as well as just, proposing a bigger question for folks in the room today. Are there any other parent groups that you are not seeing on this chart right now, on this graph? Who isn't here? Who counts as a parent group? And do you personally know any parent leaders that participate in any of these parent groups? Again, I'm going to stop talking and give the mic over to anybody that would like to talk and give it a couple of seconds to see if there are any thoughts.
Hi. I'm talking before you give me the word. I don't know if it's okay for everybody.
Go ahead, Jenny.
All right. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm trying something new actually. We've been here having a lot of struggles because all my PTO members are Caucasians, no other language speakers. And I am in a community where my school, only my school, 54% are Latinos, and that's without counting or African Americans, are Haitian, Creole, and other members of the school. So we are a big majority of non-English speakers here. So at the time that my parents go to PTO, it is not they cannot afford to have interpretation, so it's not something that they can have. So it's not interpretation, and they're not feeling comfortable. Besides that, they don't understand anything of what's happening. They don't feel comfortable either. So after being brainstorming with the families and everything around, we decided to start meeting. So during the last 3-4 months, I've been meeting with the Latino community here at school, like a small group, parent group. And we've been like talking about different things and about things happening in the school. We've been learning a little bit about what is a circle, what are restorative practices, and just giving the parents the opportunity to talk and to start the process of empowering themselves. And I'm very proud. I feel very proud of it. I feel that we're doing a good job together, and I have tremendous notes from the parents, and those conversations have spikes, and and very, very good and positive things that I am preparing to present now to the administration on top, like my principal, the superintendent as well.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jenny. You are my favorite human being. Don't tell anybody else I said that. But Jenny, from what I'm gathering from you so far, I'm hearing a broader question that I think is really valuable to pose to folks here today. And that question is, if the PTO is not representative of the communities that we are trying to reach, what should our next steps be? And Jenny, from what you were saying so far, is that your next steps were to figure out, aside from the language barrier, why folks feel like their voices aren't being heard. And, your solution to that was to, connect with them one-on-one, gather their opinions, their voices first, and then being that middle ground. And essentially being their cultural broker, which is amazing and awesome and so lovely. And from this, I think what I'm gathering is that, aside, I've mentioned this before, aside from that language barrier, there is also this broader discussion on representation, as well as a broader discussion on, how each district can answer the question of why aren't folks showing up? And this is an area that, from a lot of other one-on-one conversations I've had with other districts is very personal and very unique to every school. And it's not something that can be answered within 2 hours together here today. But I think this is a really great starting point. And I think, linking that conversation back of who's showing up and who isn't showing up is going to be so important for us to understand further how we can connect to our parent groups. I'm seeing another comment here from Claudia. Claudia says, we at BPS have school climate teams made up of staff and parents focused on co-creating a welcoming school environment for students and families. That's amazing, Claudia. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm wondering if folks have any thoughts about having school climate teams, if folks have anything similar, if Claudia would like to speak more on that, or, if folks don't have anything similar to school climate teams, what is the substitute, or what is something that they are looking to establish at their schools?
I can just add, hi everyone, that this is something new to BPS. So we are this year have been working on developing what that's going to look like, how what things we want to implement, focusing on the core values at the school and how we are presenting those to the students, the families, and how we are, being an example as a community on the core values of each of the schools.
And I love that. Thank you so much for sharing further. And I think, if folks have any specific questions about any of that, feel free to respond in the comments, raise your hand as well. And also generally for the sake of time, I'm just gonna once again let the space clear for folks to, especially Sarah, Leslie, if y'all have anything else to say as well, to just, add a couple of things, and then I'm going to move on to the next slide.
So the only other thing I might add here is the obligation of all of us to help newcomers understand the American school system a little bit, and also the concept of parent groups, because their communities, their countries, wherever they're coming from, may not have the same structures that we have. So it's important for them to understand how Americans value the role of parents in school systems, and helping them understand, and that's maybe making that connection with another parent so that they feel comfortable asking some questions maybe before they get involved. I like making people feel comfortable before they join things. And if something's only in English and the whole meeting's in English and there's no food, it's not going to be fun. So we just need to, I think, stop and think, who's not at the table, who's not here, and make concerted efforts to reach out to communities, cultural brokers, families in the community that can, support that bridging to the newcomers.
Thank you, Leslie. And I think that's a really great way to end our conversation so far about this slide in general. And I will say, as a person with this sort of lived experience and as, and as a sibling of somebody, of a sister that has disabilities, my mother is a very strong parent advocate, but as an immigrant coming into this country, she had no resources, no languages, and no people to guide her in this process. So everything that she did herself. We were lucky in that my mom knew a little bit of English, just enough to get her by, so that while researching this process, she was able to pull together information. We lived in California, enough so that she could get my sister an IEP. But, that process isn't easy for a lot of folks, especially if they're coming from resettlement programs. And something that would have really, really benefited my family is if during registration, we were guided to CPACs. And CPACs had people that spoke our language and could pull my mother in. My sister would have benefited from an IEP much sooner than later. And this would have helped our family and my mom's advocacy journey tenfold. And I just wanted to add that in because I feel like little touches of personal information, just personal stories, are important in this line of work. I'm happy to share these things. And I think, it's important to just kind of recognize that lived experience is so powerful in these conversations. And it's why we really need to think about, when highlighting parent groups, how this affects our power dynamics with our parents, and how this leads to power sharing. So I'm going to move on very quickly over to our next slide. Folks that have joined me before will probably be very familiar with this diagram already. For people that are just joining our conversation, and for the sake of this recording, I will be briefly describing this just for a little bit in a couple of sentences. What you see here is something that we call the four-way Venn diagram of belonging. So this belonging diagram is a way to sort of, kind of map out where folks are in terms of welcoming our newcomer families by 4 milestones. And in a clockwise fashion, I will go through each milestone for folks, just as a breather, as a reminder, and also for folks to just kind of get on the same page as each other. On the first, at 12 o'clock, you have the milestone understanding context with a lightning bulb icon. And by understanding context, we mean anything from understanding regulations of school systems to understanding legal statuses, why people understand and know their legal status, or why some people may not know their legal status, even if they are the newcomer family themselves, as well as knowing where our families are coming from, if this is their first time resettling, if they have been in Massachusetts or in any other state before, as well as if they know anybody else here. So these are a couple of examples of how we can begin to understand our context of how we interact with people, how we understand where to go from here, what resources we should be providing. And on the topic of resources, again, in a clockwise fashion, going to 3 p.m., you will see a house icon with the milestone accessing basic needs. And this is something that folks here are probably the most familiar with. It's the question that we all get the most. For example, where do we go for housing services? What do we do if we don't know our legal status? Where can we go to find food, clothing, and how do we keep in contact with people that can tell us more about our child's education? So this is the basis of accessing basic needs. Pretty self-explanatory. And at 6 p.m., again, clockwise fashion, you will find an icon of 2 people conversing with each other. And that icon represents the milestone respecting language and culture. What we mean by that is, for example, what translations, interpretations are we providing to folks if they need them? Do we know what languages folks speak? And if we know, do we know how many? In terms of, what is lost between the lines when we are translating, how can we get a better understanding of the general concepts that we are trying to demonstrate to folks and what folks are demonstrating to us? How do we make sure that we understand the intricacies of everybody's cultures, their faith, their mannerisms, their way of life? And how do we make sure that this is all done in a respectful manner? Lastly, at 9 p.m., we have the handshake icon that indicates the last milestone that we're going through of everybody here today, which is partnering with communities. Partnering with communities can mean anything from what we're doing here today, learning more about how to partner and work with our parent-led groups and parent leadership, as well as how to reach out to external community organizations, whether that be nonprofits in your area, whether that be external, local groups, local neighborhoods, as well as, families in faith-based institutions that certain demographics of our newcomer families may, gravitate more towards, as well as generally, partners like FCSN. And how can we make sure that we all bring everything that we're seeing here together? And the point of illustrating and being so descriptive about this diagram is that we want to, really emphasize that all of these milestones together create a more full, richer sense of belonging. You will see arrows pointing at the intersections of each of these circles. And what those are indicators that, all of these milestones are not numbered specifically because we want folks to make sure that we know that we don't need to have one in order to then do the other. This can be very intersectional work because of the nature of what we do and because of the nature of who we work with. All of these intersections are, combinations that folks can, think of themselves and how that, pertains to your own personalization of your projects, your own districts. But more importantly, it also indicates that you can do one thing and the other at the same time. You do not need to understand context before teaching others as well as yourself how to access basic needs. You do not need to respect language and culture before partnering with your communities. You can do both at the same time. You can do one first. It is all up to you and your process. But the reason why we are explaining this again in this specific webinar is because firstly, this is the accumulation of all of the topics we have been able to cover in the last couple months together. And secondly, because we want to make sure again, and folks will, folks will feel familiar with me saying this from if they have been to the May 2nd webinar, but we want to, again, make sure that this is something that folks really think about and put in their minds when they are working with parent-led organizations and groups. If we are working with parents that are not newcomer families, this, of course, as always will integrate, any sort of context and will always relate and apply to them as well. So I'm going to move on very quickly because I feel like I know most of the names here and I feel like everybody, y'all already got a pretty good grasp on this. So I'm going to move on, but feel free as always to, speak up, raise your hand, put things in the chat. But for the sake of time, again, I will go over to the next slide. If folks have been to our other webinars before, you will also be very familiar with this statistic. It is something, if I can have a favorite depressing statistic, this is my favorite one. And it really depends on how you look at it, on your perspective of things, right? But this is our current reality, and I would love for folks to just kind of think about this and reflect on it for a moment of our time today. And what you're seeing on the screen visually is the title reviewing our current reality alongside a pie chart to the left side of the screen, with a descriptor on the right. And that descriptor in italics says about 1 in every 6 Massachusetts residents is foreign born, and that is 17.6% of our population. 17.6%. And, from our conversations just now with a couple of folks that were speaking, Jenny, I'll use your example, if you don't mind, of how a large majority of folks in Salem in your school district, are not white. And if we really think about the statistic of how many residents is foreign born and the number of immigrants that we welcome in this country, regardless of whether they are having their newcomer status or not, regardless of whether they have legal status, if they have paperwork, this number is only going to increase. Statistically, realistically, this number is only going to increase. So if we know this about Massachusetts, if we know that 1 in every 6 of us is foreign born, myself included, I am included in this statistic, I am the 1 out of 6, then how can we consider strategies to connect with our families in a proactive way? And the word that I would love for everybody to focus on here today is the word proactive. How can we make sure that our actions, items, our plans, the ways that we forge our relationships are not reactive in that, we know that folks are coming in now. We know that we need more support, but instead in a proactive way of, we know this is going to be coming. How can we get ahead of the game? And, I really appreciate each and one of the folks here today, especially folks that I've seen for a really long time, because, this is a part of that proactive strategy. This is a part of how we can together brainstorm ways to make sure that we have things ready for when folks come into the future. And if people are comfortable with sharing any issues that might come up, during that integration family engagement process for newcomer families, feel free to share if you have any solutions. So far, I'm all ears as well. Can folks see my screen?
No. No, right
Dark.
now.
Yeah, it's a dark screen right now.
Oh, okay. Let me just see if I can fix this really quickly.
And well, everyone, I just want to make one sentence out of the graphic that we just saw. 17 something percent.
Yep.
But think of our kids are they born here. Like maybe we have that amount, but then the reality is that our immigrant community is bigger than that, because it's only counted for foreign born there, 1 in 6. But what happened with a lot of us that we come here and then we have our kids here. So like all the parents of those kids that they are born and raised here, they come, and some of us spend 20, 30 years and we still are not completely like some of them of our parents didn't have the opportunity to get ESL classes or anything because they have to work or they have to do other stuff, or some kids are being raised by grandparents.
Mm-hmm. Jenny, that's a really wonderful point to make. And I think that, really speaks to the intricacy of how we view our family structures and what is normalized in school districts when we speak about family structures in our systems. There is increasingly more and more understanding of what it means to be in a multi-generational home, what it means to be in a multilingual home, and, what that looks like for folks, for educators, for everybody. But, I think what Jenny is saying is really significant to this conversation, because, essentially what I'm getting away from this, what I'm taking away is that it's not only the foreign born residents that are impacted by our current reality. It is everybody, it is their descendants, and this is a generational issue. This will keep on going if there is a lack of information and lack of relationship in one generation of foreign born residents. It will continue on to the next, because there will be realistically a gap in our understandings of our systems. And kudos to you, Jenny. I'm snapping right now. You can't see me, but I'm snapping. Thank you for bringing that up. That is amazing. And I think that was a really important topic to consider. And I'm wondering if other folks have any other, just responses to this dialogue before I move on.
I'm going to say something. I missed some of it because I was on with a district. And she just told me they are cutting 30 staff.
Oh my
That will
gosh.
include ELL teachers, English language learner teachers, and it's going to be pretty desperate for districts right now. And so it's really going to have to be very creative how they meet the needs, of these families that are coming, not just like you're talking about, they're already here or are still coming. It's going to be very difficult. And I'm concerned about it. And this is just a district who's a smaller district on the Cape. That's a lot of staff.
Mm-hmm. I hear you, and thank you for sharing that. And I think this is good to know for everybody here, just in terms of what's happening to folks and what's happening in other places. And I would love for us to explore more options as to how we can proactively problem solve that issue when we are thinking about short-term and long-term solutions. But thank you for sharing, and thank you for speaking about it. I think this brings a lot to our dialogue and a lot to the statistic. And again, if folks at any point, you don't have to speak up now. I know I go pretty fast, but if folks have any other thoughts about this, feel free as always, to put it in the comments. And we'll know exactly what y'all are talking about. Okay. And, I think we're doing a lot of this already, but just generally upon further reflection, thinking about families and newcomer relationships. This is a slide that only has really a couple lines of text. We are looking at 2 reflection questions in bold, as well as some text at the bottom in italics about previous webinars and information, but I will read out loud the 2 reflection questions that I would just like for folks to think about and just keep in the back of their mind. We might not be able to fully reflect on this right now, but if folks would like to fully reflect on this in a more intimate setting, in a more intimate space, I am always here to set up conversations with you and to speak about this further. I fully welcome and I'm very happy to do these conversations. And I think I always learn a lot when I do it. And as well as any other FCSN staff available as well. So, feel free to screenshot this if if these are questions that you would like to bring up to your staff. Anybody else working on these issues, feel free to do so, but I will read aloud these reflection questions. The first one that I'm bringing to you to hear today is, firstly, how do family leaders foster newcomer family relationships and what are barriers? We have spoken plenty about barriers in the last coming webinars. Since January, February, we've been talking about our barriers. And, we are all experts on this by this matter. We know that there are language barriers. We know that there are technology barriers. We know that culturally, there is a lot that is left unsaid. We know that there is, as Jenny has pointed out before, a lack of representation. All of these, as well as, fears and apprehension that only the newcomer community is fully understanding and experiencing, as well as any other immigrants that have gone through this process will understand, such as, battling the fear of legal repercussions, the fear of stepping into legal public spaces, the fear of, communicating and having that being used against you. And that was personally one of my biggest fears for a very long time when I was a child and when I was doing, overcoming my own immigration process. All of these things are vital to understanding that there is a lot left unsaid. But because we know that there are so many different barriers and we recognize them, how do we make sure that family leaders are also in tune with us doing the same, fostering these newcomer family relationships with us, alongside us? We know already that, our families have experiences that are so valuable because both they are lived and because they are part of the community. And we know from the statistic that we saw before that a lot of these families might have generationally previously experienced, these newcomer, anxieties, these worries, these fears before. And, a lot of this is, as we've discussed, passed down to different generations. And we therefore know that because of all of this, our family leaders hold a lot of lived experience, which is so valuable, a lot of empathy, and a lot of knowledge about where to begin when we are reaching out to newcomer families. From the work that folks are doing in family engagement, we also know that the best way to reach out to newcomer families is to forge relationships, intimate relationships, that might go from, what a family's favorite coffee order is to when they get off of work, anything that helps to connect us to each other. And that leads us to our second reflection question in bold, in the middle of the screen. What are values of a welcoming environment we should prioritize for newcomer families? And by we, I mean we collectively, not only we as a part of the education system, but also we as parents and folks that work alongside other parent leaders. If folks have any thoughts about any of these reflection questions, including specific values of welcoming environments, I invite you now to put your thoughts into the chat and to speak up about what you feel. Claudia has put in the chat empathy, and I cannot agree more. Thank you, Claudia. Yes, 100%. I think empathy, is a very big part of incorporating our understanding of our systems and passing them on towards our families and our parent leaders, and creating community. And yeah, I think we've already said a lot about empathy, so I'm just gonna let it lay. But thank you for speaking, Claudia. I appreciate you. And again, in the interest of time, I think we should move forward, if everybody is okay with that.
The only other thing I might add is
Uh-huh.
if I'm thinking of the perfect world where we're bringing the newcomer families in an environment, a group environment where they're working with others. And to me, those group values and norms should be established together. And that's where the best conversation happens, for them to understand, the value of maybe privacy or confidentiality around some of the discussions that happen in groups, or the value of listening to everyone. Everyone gets a chance to speak, and creating those spaces. So when I work with groups, we try to come together and agree on a set of group values or norms that reflect their needs and their environment. And that's going to be a little difficult to work through all of those barriers, which we know are there, but that might be a very valuable experience to bring them together in a common understanding.
Thank you, Leslie. And I think that's just generally a really important concept for us to keep in mind as we continue on as well. That, this, what Leslie is saying, essentially what I'm gathering from what you're saying, Leslie, is that we need to keep in mind how to share the power of decision making, so that all the voices that are usually not represented are heard equally, in an equitable way. And I think that is really important for us to recognize as a value in terms of a welcoming environment, especially when we're talking about systems and leaders. And especially when we're talking about power, is how to not only wield it, but also how to share it. As mediators in this process, as we all are, how can we make sure that we not only ourselves recognize that, because I know everybody here already does. Y'all are awesome, amazing people and wonderful at the work that y'all do. But how do we make sure that we can share that concept with other people that we work with and make it an important part of other people's agendas? I'm going to leave everything at that because I think there is a lot to say, and I will move over to the next slide. So if folks have been around since our 10-hour series in around late February to early March, y'all might feel familiar with this slide. I am bringing this up again because I think it is important to recognize a couple of, just concepts of strategies for us to combine our school communities, our family communities, and the general district as a whole. This slide has a series of 6 bullet points. On the left, it is titled Strategies, Schools, Families, Communities. And on the right side of the screen, you will see in bold another reflection question. This reflection question is the same one as the second one that we talked about just now. Very similar, at least. I don't think it's quite worded just the same, but it's there for you to think about while we're going through these strategies. We don't want to spend too much time on this because I think, they're all ideas that folks are already very intimately familiar with. But there are things and, terminology and language to keep in mind for sure as we're going through this process. And later on, as we're thinking, more specifically about actions that we want to make sure we integrate into our planning process. We begin firstly with the idea of welcoming every family. And this is why everybody is here today. So I'm just going to skip right through that and move over to the second bullet point of recognizing that, we often talk about this dual communication, this two-way communication between our schools and our families. But what we even more so want to emphasize today, that instead of just thinking of, family engagement as this binary concept where it is only between families and only between schools, we must recognize that, especially if we're welcoming folks that are not a part of the community, that the community as a whole is important and an important voice to our communication process. And what better to understand our community than to speak with parent leaders? So this concept of a three-way communication process is vital and important to our understanding of who holds power. And that leads us to our third bullet point: how do we share power? Who is sharing this power? And how can we make sure that this process of sharing power is done so equitably? And we know that because of empirical research, and because we've all seen it happen from the work that we do from personal experience, that family engagement leads to student success. So this idea that we are all supporting our students together and that this whole situation of welcoming our newcomer families is vital to supporting student success is a must to speaking to our, people and our fellow people in the system on why this work must be done, as well as speaking to our families about why folks should care about newcomer families. We know that collectively, when we uphold the values of welcoming all families, or specifically families with marginalized identities, particularly newcomer families in this context, we are upholding every family and every district. And that leads us to the second to last bullet point: collaborating with our community. We've spoken a little bit before when we've talked about our belonging diagram, the importance of collaborating with our community. And because of that, it is a bullet point and a milestone for us in terms of partnership. Lastly, we have this concept of speaking for every child. And this is a concept that we're all so familiar with. We know that we must speak for every child, but how do we speak for every child, and who should be speaking for each child? And these are the questions that we must ask when we are thinking about ways to really personalize our strategies to understand and forge connections with our parent groups. Perhaps, you know, as we mentioned before, there are many different types of parent-led groups. Perhaps, you know, for example, you know, we have a CPAC in a district that is very active. But there is no process so far of, you know, this pipeline of funneling newcomer families towards our CPAC. How do we make sure that newcomer families' children are being spoken for, and how do we empower our newcomer families to join our CPACs and also to uphold leaders of, you know, positions of power in our CPACs, especially if we come across the issue of potentially that, you know, newcomer folks of specific backgrounds are not already being represented in that CPAC. These are all important issues that we must consider. So I'm going to stop this slide at this point and wait to see if there's any feedback. I'm going to give it a couple of seconds in the interest, again, of time. If folks feel like we're at a pretty comfortable place, I will move on. Okay. I think that was around 10 seconds. I shall move on. For folks that have attended our last webinar on May 2nd, you will have heard from our fellow friends and FCSN staff, Cambria and Megan, on the power of co-designing as a tool. I am bringing the slide back up once again to, you know, just kind of visually demonstrate the power of sharing power, as well as the power of sharing decision-making as a process. On this slide, you will see to the left in bold a quote on co-design and its definition. And on the right side, you will see a visual, a kind of, I don't know, it's not really a graph nor a chart, a visual, you know, description and indicator of how co-design can come to be. Let's just put it at that. I can explain it a little further on later as well. And I will read for our auditory learners the definition of co-design on the left side of the screen. Co-design refers to a highly participatory approach to designing solutions in which community members are treated as equal collaborators in the design process. Just by looking at this definition, I'm inviting folks right now to please, you know, put down any terms that you really highly identify with and feel like are valuable in this definition. I'm just gonna give folks a couple of seconds to just put down any terms that you really resonate with. Okay, Sarah says, I see, in quotes, co-design, community, collaborate. And that's such a lovely point to make, Sarah, honestly. If you're comfortable doing so, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on that, or just, you know, generally why that resonates. I have a good idea, but, you know, I'm talking a lot.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for this slide. I think it's really a good way to highlight a concept of power sharing. And you know, I think that it's just really emphasizing the idea of equal participation, and the idea of you know, bringing people together, and how, you know, and how important that is to really make people feel like their opinions matter and are being considered.
I hear you. I hear you, and I really love the point that you're making. And I just think that it's so powerful that the syllables of, you know, co-design, community, and collaborate are so similar and hold these similarities. And I think that's a really great concept for folks to really keep in mind as we continue onwards. And Yeah, thank you again, Sarah. But going over to the right side of the screen, you will see this graphic from the bottom up, 4 bubbles that lead to co-design. You will see an arrow in green that points towards co-design as the biggest bubble on top. The arrow says power sharing through participation. And from the bubbles that lead to the one that is in blue on top, co-design, are firstly survey, secondly focus group, thirdly advisory committee, and then lastly co-design. And this is a visual example and indicator of how we can produce power sharing in a way that is equitable and in a way that is academic and logically makes sense for folks that want to, really make sure that this sort of thing is established within a system. So I'm going to keep it at that because we've already spoken a lot on co-design in past sessions as well, particularly the last one. And I'm going to move on to our next slide. This is one of our last slides before we move on to our more interactive elements of this webinar when we're, really creating solutions together. But before we do that, I would love to ask folks the specific question that is on the second row of the slide in italics. In partnership, what can we receive? And this is an important question to ask ourselves because from, just from speaking with folks and, people that are now I consider friends, hopefully y'all feel the same, but just speaking with folks in general from different school districts on talking about partnerships, we know that this is not an easy process, and partnering, especially with big systems, with bigger established systems such as parent-led groups, that already have structures put in place, that is not easy either. And we know that this is not easy because we are always limited by our time. We know that this is a time-consuming process. We understand that, this will take a lot of not only the values that we hold dear, but also a lot of our brain power, a lot of things and resources that we could be, using to just kind of patch up other areas in family engagement that we got to patch up. But why is this important, and what are we receiving in return when we are focusing on parent-leader partnership? A couple of examples are displayed in the chart below. You will see that each has 5 different bullet points. There are 2 columns. The column on the left is titled school districts, and the column on the right is titled parent-led groups. I will be reading them out loud in parallel so that folks can, just kind of think about a little bit what we're receiving in return, and how this sort of communication leads to more resources for us in the long run. For us as school districts, firstly, we receive enhanced communication, and that realistically leads to more data. And what data gives us is budgeting. And what budgeting gives us is more long-term solutions. Secondly, we get more community engagement, and this is very vital for us to know, because when we have that sort of community engagement in our hands, we understand more clearly what people need, what we can be doing more effectively. Thirdly, we are resource sharing. And this is important because we then can understand that we are not alone in this process. What is happening right now in Massachusetts as a statewide issue is that all of us together are trying to find ways to figure out how to get families to resources they need. This is an issue that has been around for ages, for years. And what that means for us really, and what that signifies, is that there is no resource sharing. And if there is resource sharing, there is not enough of it to go around. So what is the way that we can strategize more effectively and more smartly about how to make this problem go away? It cannot go away in the short term, but it can go away in the long term. And that is to support and share all the resources that we're using, regardless of whether we have enough of it ourselves, because the more we know about each other's resources, the more we understand how to navigate the system and what the gaps are. Fourthly, we get support for different initiatives. Once we partner with our different groups, with our communities, we understand the power of voices as well as the power of representation even more clearly. We have the support for the different types of initiatives that we as family engagement folks already know we need. And that is really, really significant because then we have people in the community to back us up. We know the data, we know the logistics, we know the reality, but once we have everybody in on it, we're good to go. Lastly, we have more diverse perspectives on what we need and what we're producing and who we are as a community. This is important because this long-term wise brings up a lot more student success from, all the data and from all of the information and the tools that we've shared prior to this. We know that having diverse perspectives is important because it brings and creates better systems in the long run and for everybody, not just those that might need it right now. And this is going to be important and also reflected as well as flipped in our parent-led groups. We see that firstly, they will have amplified voices, which is important to enhance communication, community engagement, and support for initiatives as well as diverse perspectives. We also see that they get access to resources that they may not have known about before. We know that there will be an increased impact of their work that they are working so hard to achieve. We know that there will be more professional development that comes with enhanced communication, that comes with diverse perspectives and resource sharing. And lastly, we give everybody recognition, not only as their work as parents, but also their work as community leaders. So in this partnership, we are receiving not only in the short term, but in the long term, so much more than we are giving. And that is why we are, that is why this work is so impactful. And that is why we are here today. And that is the sort of message that we need to spread amongst our peers to make sure that everybody is on the same page. I just said a lot of stuff. I am going to open up the stage for folks that might like to chime in about anything that they feel like might resonate with them in this moment. I'm seeing Dr. Soraya has joined us. Hello. You are also a lovely, lovely human being that I adore. I am so happy to have you here today with us. And I'm seeing in the comments that you said, elevate, hear, and connect, listen in silence. And, I agree. Thank you for bringing those terms up. And I think I'm hearing you and I see that, for me, all of those things really resonate with me because they connect to active listening. And that is what we are all attempting to do. And that really relates and resonates with partnership. So thank you. I'm going to stay quiet now, let folks talk. If y'all got any comments, anything to say, anything to add.
Hi, good afternoon. It is such a relief whenever I'm here because seriously, your tone, the way you understand families as human being, it's well resonated. And if we can only think about what we can receive, and too often school are not thinking about that. They only think about that what they have, they want to give without really having perspective from families. So there is so many benefits to it. We talk about amplifying the voices, but also there is so much power where we can listen. To me, when you talk about co-designing, it's really having a level field, right? Because there's so much that we don't know about families and so much they have, the rich culture that they have, they can share with us. That is where the listening is coming from. And as you listen, you really learn. And again, listening to you, I'm like, yes, I'm checking all the boxes. And what can we do really to open people's minds to see the benefits of family engagement? That needs to be highlighted, not for people in the field of family engagement. And I believe that everyone should be part of family engagement because it is, as you mentioned earlier, it's really connected, and research show it's really connected to student success. so much to gain. How can people, it's hard for me to grasp the idea that family don't, school do not get that. It's more than access to resources. When you say that partnership, what can we receive? We receive really their knowledge, right? I believe that families know so much about their children. And if we can only give them the chance to say, this is what works for my child, and just listen to them, we will see children really thrive. We can really see their talents. I picture myself sometimes when I'm in a field that I don't think people see me really. So that idea of feeling belonging, I don't. So because I do not feel belong, you cannot see my talents. You're missing out on my skills. So we are missing so much. And as you put it so well, the school can receive not only that knowledge, but also respect. If you hear from many families, they will tell you that they don't respect me in the school. I don't think they see me in the school. I'm not even welcome in the school. Just think about it when families start feeling that they respect them and they just move differently. Because as you think about the new families coming in, regardless of where they come from, they are children. We also need to think about that. Those children, they are not different than the one who we have here in the United States or anywhere else. Let's start changing that having that shift in our mind in the school for the school settings per se. I think add values also and things that they can receive. Professional development. I always love the idea of professional development, but I think people need to understand is that one size fit all. Is that one day of professional development and then you never heard of it after. It should be continuous. And also having families be part of those professional development, because we have so much to learn from them. Having community leaders who understand the culture, the language, and so many aspects of those newcomers coming in. Again, as you mentioned, it's really collaboration. And as we collaborate, as we respect one another, as we acknowledge what they are bringing to the schools and how we can learn from them, now they are recognized. Now they are seen. Now they feel they belong. Now they can enter. And now we can see those children in a different lens. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Soraya. You always bring excellent points. I am snapping for you. You can't see me right now because my data is horrible, so I unfortunately can't open up my monitor. But you bring such thoughtfulness and such resonance into this space, and I just want to acknowledge that and acknowledge you in this moment. And thank you for speaking on this. I completely agree, and I think what you're saying resonates with all of us because we all understand the importance of this work, and we all know why this why this is so needed. So thank you again. And I think this is a really great space to just kind of continue onwards into the logistics of what we can do to plan for how we engage with our PACs, with our PTOs, with our site councils, any other parent group. And if folks would like to, I am inviting you right now to take a screenshot of this slide if you would like to keep these points close to you while we are doing the rest of our work. Or if folks would like to take notes, I don't know if y'all are doing that or not. I always welcome it. But just to keep your thoughts somewhere while we're going into the more logistical side of things. But I think a lot of it is a lot of concepts that we know are abstract but can be turned into a reality, and a lot of that really goes back to how these concepts, for example, amplify voice for parent-led groups, how can that be turned into a statistic that helps and empowers the community? How do we calculate how many voices are amplified? How do we know who is being amplified, and how do we know who has been already? And where do we go from there? You know, those are a couple of questions and a couple of examples of what we can be thinking about when we're discussing and just kind of brainstorming power sharing, decision making, and family-led leadership and partnerships. But I'm gonna keep this thought close to me, as I will invite y'all to do the same, and I will move on to the next slide. This is generally a slide to just kind of encapsulate everything that we've said already. On the right side of the slide, you will see the text, the graphic of the belonging diagram. I've been speaking too much today. This this title is supportive frameworks. And these are a couple of frameworks that we've talked about already. We've spoken in the bullet points to the left. We've spoken on co-design. We've spoken before, especially in multiple webinars, about cultural brokering. We've talked about the concept of belonging as, you know, being navigated by these 4 specific milestones. And what we are going to do now, moving onwards to the next slide, is to put it in practice. And we're using practice intentionally as a word because, you know, we are practicing this. This is something that, as Dr. Soraya wonderfully put it, cannot be resolved in a 2-hour webinar, much less a 1-hour PD or something similar. This is going to be something that, you know, requires, as we all know, a lot of effort. It requires a lot of heart. And I just want folks to know that we're here in this together. I'm always here as a resource for folks. If you have any other questions, you know, particularly about what we've been talking about here today, but also if you have any specific questions that are district specific, family specific, you know, basic needs specific, we are here as a resource, not only to support you in your path to personalizing these frameworks, but also to be the mediator and the bridge and the gap between communication for you and your families, and also for you and, you know, the federal systems and the state. So we're here as a resource, and please don't forget that. Over here, I will be jumping left and right pretty quickly, but this is titled the short-term framework. For people taking notes, please note that I will come back to this in a second. I'm just going to show the next slide really quickly. The next slide is the long-term framework that we'll be going through today. So the long-term framework is a proactive and sustainable way to think about how we view action plans. The short-term framework that we're gonna go through over here is a more reactive and responsive way to think about our next steps. And what the reason why we are showing you these 2 frameworks together is because we, you know, as outsiders, rightfully so, do not know what you need. We cannot in good faith give one or the other to you and have that be the expectation of this is the solution. Everything is personalized, everything, you know, is supported, of course, but we welcome folks and we invite folks to personalize these 2 frameworks as much as you can. Maybe you need a medium-term framework instead of a short or long-term framework. You know, maybe y'all, you know, might need a short-term framework that is the span of 2 weeks, but your long-term framework is the span of 2 months. But maybe for another district, they might need a short-term framework of 2 months and a long-term framework of 2 years. This is a process that is difficult and different for everybody, and I just want to acknowledge that up front. I am going to very briefly go through what these frameworks mean before I have everybody split off into different breakout rooms and explain what we're going to be doing together, and why Sarah and Leslie are such amazing resources, as they are wonderful people. But I've mentioned briefly that the short-term framework is based off of this understanding that it is meant to be reactive and responsive, you know, a Band-Aid, but that can be useful depending on what folks need. The goals of the short-term framework are on the left side of the screen. It is to understand the needs of the families upfront, and that can be, you know, related to any milestone that we talked about before. It is also, secondly, to provide communities for families as a landing point. And this is to, you know, like, we're thinking about creating that pipeline. We want to create it fast. We know people are coming in and out of the system. How do we organize the system fast enough to get people to where they need? And then we trust our parent leaders enough to give it to them and, you know, let them take it from there. Because, you know, a lot of this is relationship building, but, you know, in parallel to that, a lot of this is trust. Thirdly, our last goal is to create accessible ways for us to find resources. And that is something that we've been doing for quite a while now here at FCSN. If folks have been in our sessions before, you'll know that we have been working tirelessly on a newcomer family resource hub. And that hub is for our school districts to go in, look at a non-exhaustive list of resources that are hyperlinked, which I can share later if folks are interested and don't know about it yet, as well as providing a space for people to engage in dialogue about what is useful, what isn't, what do they want to see, and what are next steps for everybody. And on the right side of the screen, you will see a couple of suggested short-term actions for folks to engage in. Now, you might have been doing this already, which is amazing, but maybe this is something that folks might want to talk to their team about and just kind of explore a little bit further as an option. A couple of these entail orientation programs, which I know a lot of folks are already doing and are doing amazing work with. That might be also, peer support networks. And we've talked about this a lot in our community of practice, where a lot of folks are really, really digging this idea of having peer-to-peer families and peer-to-peer students, which is a wonderful practice if you are a family engagement specialist, coordinator, to speak to your teachers about. I think this is awesome, and it's something that a lot of folks really resonated with before. And some of this might also look like having a more kind of a more in-depth immediate needs assessment. So what does it look like for families that are in specific areas? What are specific immediate needs, and what can we already put as a resource in our assessments for folks that are taking it, whether they've been here for 2 weeks or a year. So this is essentially the way that we are eyeing our short-term framework. I'm moving on very quickly over to our long-term framework, which utilizes a proactive and sustainable strategy. The goals of this are to, in opposite of having a Band-Aid process, to have a sustainable pipeline for resource access. The example that I gave before was to, quickly form a connection with our PACs so that when we have newcomer families, we can funnel them into an existing parent group so they know where to find their community. But in a long-term setting, how do we make this a sustainable process? How do we make sure our parent leader groups are not overwhelmed with the amount of people that we are sending their way? How do we make this possible? And that is what the long-term framework seeks to, really engage with. The second goal is to assess and incorporate the results of initiatives into future planning. So, we have all of this resource, we have all of these ideas. How can we make this into data so that we can, accurately assess what needs to be done next in a way that is digestible for our systems? Thirdly, we want to create holistically a foundation of systemic support. We want there, and this is a perfect world. This is where everybody is happy. This is where everything is boundless. But we eventually want to get to a point where we have systemic support on all angles for everybody, whoever they may be. And that is a goal that is idealistic, but it is a goal that I don't think necessarily isn't achievable. I think this is achievable from all the lovely folks that are here, and from folks that are carrying on our work. I think this is something that we can do, and this is something that we're addressing in this framework. A couple of actions on the right include how to integrate, sustainable strategies into our curriculums. How do we establish, instead of just, matching folks peer to peer, how do we establish mentorship programs? What does that look like in a parent-led community? And lastly, how to monitor data and how to evaluate it, again, in a way that is digestible, not only for families to understand, but also for our systems, because ultimately that is where all of our funding comes from. So how do we make sure that situations like what we just heard about with the cutoff of 30 staff Ls will not happen again? And that is the bigger picture. I'm seeing, oh, goodbye. Sorry, that was a DM. But that is what we're ultimately attempting to do with these two frameworks. I will now be setting folks up into breakout rooms. And what we are aiming to do here is to create, conversation, to create open dialogue about what folks are working on, what folks are resonating from this information. And if people have been here in our last webinar, please let me know, and I can provide you the copy of this of the SWOT analysis that you did with Cambria of Megan if you don't have it on hand. If you do have it on hand already, I'll let y'all go and do your thing. But what we're going to be doing here today, as I mentioned, is to split off. Leslie, and Sarah will be here as facilitators in this process. I will remain in the main room for folks if people have any questions to come to me. But what we're going to be doing, again, is to think about, with these action items, what our first steps are going to be, how to pinpoint where we are, and which frameworks are we prioritizing right now? Are we doing a short term? Are we doing a long term? Or would y'all like to do both at the same time? These are all options. They are all available. We are all now collectively at the same page because we went through a lot of these materials together. We have half an hour of our time. If folks are, I understand that it's May, folks are busy. And that's totally understandable. If y'all would like to schedule a time with me to do it one-on-one in a more intimate setting or with other FCSN folks, feel free to let me know and we can make that happen. So if folks have to go but want to do this with us still, and this is a valuable resource for everybody, please let us know. And if folks would like to stay and do this in a smaller group setting with everybody else and just kind of share thoughts, pop around opinions and ideas, I welcome you and invite you to stay and do so. I will now stop my recording. And I think we're landing at a pretty good place for folks to, just kind of go back and rewatch.